Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I'm DaRon.
And I'm Roniel. I really wanted to talk today about the shortage in cybersecurity because it seems like there's a lot of shortage in security, just all around it. Doesn't matter whether it's auditing, whether it's security engineering, or consulting, contracting. I really want to talk about a little bit more on why there's a shortage and how we can fix that. What is the solution, and what is your ideas of a solution that would fix that issue?
So it's actually really funny because I think there's been a shortage of IT staff ever since IT was first a thing, right?
Yeah.
And then we only compounded the issue when we started with all these specialties within it. Windows sysadmins are a dime a dozen, but that's because of Windows, and I mean, Windows is nothing.
Right.
But what's come of it is we started specializing, and we first did that very broad general security, which kind of was more network security than anything, and it did eventually morph heavily into network security. But that wound up bleeding after a while over into a slew of different subjects to include application security, and penetration testing, of course, separated itself from the engineering side, which was doing that architecture and design and then maintenance operations and things of that nature rather quickly. I think that definitely played a huge role in it. And you couple that with the fact that there is no real degree worth anything for anything cybersecurity related.
Right. So, but even with that, like that you were talking about penetration testing, like differentiating itself from engineering, I've also noticed that, and I just wanted to ask this before we continue to go on, like, why is penetration testing now considered more of a consulting way, like, and contracting it moved over to being consultants instead of being a penetration tester? Why did it go that route? And what are your thoughts about it being moving away from penetration tester, the name itself, to a consulting or contracting base?
I think a lot of that really comes down to the big lie. In this case, I'm talking specifically about Ronald Reagan's lie that contracting was cheaper than doing it in-house. I mean, it doesn't take an accountant to realize if that were the case, then we would be in a very different world right now. But what wound up happening is the government went heavy on contracting because Reagan pushed it hard, using it supposedly as a means to reduce costs. But the premise goes like this. If I hire a contractor or a consultant, then I don't have to pay for their insurance, and I don't have to pay for things like their benefits, so 401ks, especially, so retirement, right?
Yeah.
Way back when, the government was on a real pension. It's not on a real pension anymore. Their current system is really just a glorified 401k. And that's even for the military now, which is a travesty. To me, if you're going to go through and ruin your body and risk getting killed, I mean, the reward, because the pay is terrible, so the reward should be a little better than it is. but what winds up happening is, of course, if I have a contractor, I am paying their salary, plus I'm paying overhead. Now that whole overhead is going to be their HR, their IT staff, whatever it costs that company for, licensing for, say, Microsoft Office, and for the computer and all this other stuff that the person is using. So that starts adding to the cost of this individual contractor. And then, of course, we have to pay for all the management, including vice presidents and presidents and all that good stuff. So that, again, increases that overall cost. Now, here's the other kicker. if I have you as a consultant or a contractor 100% of the time, then I am going to be paying for your life insurance. I am going to be paying for your 401k. I am going to be paying for all your different, your medical insurance and any other benefits that the company is actually offering you, I'm paying for. So not only am I paying for all the things that I would have to pay for you, but I'm also paying an overhead cost for all of your management who's not on my contract, and for HR, your HR who's not on my contract, and your IT who's also not on my contract. So we have this thing where we talk about paying in bulk. Paying in bulk is supposedly cheaper, right? So rather than buying one roll of tissue paper, I buy 10 rolls. Or if I'm at Costco, I'm buying 100 million rolls.
Right.
And I pay less per roll. Well, if that logic holds true, it would make sense that if I am hiring individuals and my HR can say do 500 individuals within a company in general, one HR person to 500. That's actually, it's probably a bit high. We'll say 100 personnel per HR individual. Then if I mostly stack with, say, small businesses are going to be less than 400 people. So that means that I'm actually not doing myself a favor because I have all these fees and they tack fees on top of it. So it's not just overhead and all this other stuff. They make you pay fees. So point in all of that being that contractors are significantly more expensive when you actually do the math. But here's the big joke to the whole thing. What you can do as a government is say, I've reduced the number of employees. And instead what you've done is you've shifted them over to contractors and consultants, right? And you're paying more for them, especially in the now. And you would say, well, not in the long term. Well, you're making a lot of assumptions about these contractor staff. Most contractor staff stay within that organization. They're what's called on-site. And they stay within that organization for their whole careers. So you are paying for their pension, for their 401k, for all their health insurance. And you're also paying for that of all of that company's folks, their IT, so on and so forth. Now, what came of all of this is a big industry grew throughout the government. And then this industry started spilling over into the corporate world because companies started doing this insane thing of saying, okay, well, I'm going to stick with what I'm good at and I'm going to contract everything else out. Now, here's the kicker. Contracting and consulting is cheaper if it's something that rarely occurs. If it's something you don't do with any regularity, any frequency. You don't sit there and build houses, right? You don't build your house and all this other stuff with any regularity. So it would be cheaper for you to go through and get a contractor for those few times where you have to do it. But at some point, if your entire staff or a large portion of your staff is contractor or consultant based, then you're losing out on a lot of money. But there was this big trend of, well, as a company, you need to slim down, cut down, and then just contract out anything that's not part of, your day-to-day work. And actually, I heard an interview recently by the guy who really pushed and started that trend within the corporate world. And he was decrying the fact that companies are even contracting out what they do on a day-to-day basis. They're even contracting out their main business to other organizations, which would be ironic. That would be like your company or my company going through and contracting out cybersecurity. It doesn't make any sense. But what's happened is because the contractor world started pulling in so much money through all this overhead and all this other stuff, there became a prestige thing. And so your penetration testers, in order to garner more money, because if we're honest here, security in general, the pay is going through the roof because it is so understaffed. And thanks to COVID, companies have finally been forced to invest in their information technology, to invest in their information systems, I should say. So all of their IT assets, which is something they weren't doing before. Before, they were pushing a lot of it off. And you'd get these really ancient just networks that were shoestring and bubble gum all over the place, right? And so COVID forced them to invest in it because no one could get into their virtual work because they didn't have a proper VPN. They didn't have proper firewalls. And then everyone starts getting compromised because, of course, they opened everything up inappropriately in order to allow virtual work. And now all of a sudden, people like you and I are in even further demand than we were before. So, but that's why you saw this title change. It was mostly glory hound and trying to pull more money. And it's all thanks to my industry, which is all thanks to Ronald Reagan and his lies.
Yeah, I found it very interesting because, back in, I want to say, let's say just roughly around the 2000s, you've seen this. I'm not saying it didn't happen before then, but around the 2000 area is when I remember like penetration testing booming, like it's just blowing up. It's a really, really big thing. The name itself, ethical hacker, all of those things were just the name to be. But then you kind of started to see the shift over the recent years where it's not penetration tester anymore. I mean, it's not even on the name. Like, if you see some of these companies, when they present their employees, you don't see penetration tester. You see security consultant or senior security consultant, or you see contractor as their title.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me because I really wanted to understand why that changed and where it changed from. Like, where did it come from? Like, what was the use of the change? But as you said, that makes more sense on why things have changed. So,
well, and another interesting part to it, as you know, is they're doing less and less actual penetration tests, right?
Yeah. I mean, let's think about it. A reference from, forgot, what is it? Live Overflow. Remember we were looking at that video where there was a comparison from penetration testing over in the US and penetration testing over in the UK. And it's a lot different from here and there. And even then, both of them to me doesn't seem like they're really doing majority of penetration testing, even from an AppSec perspective. You not utilizing certain things, do you really call it penetration testing?
Right.
Is it really like, are you really giving your client the benefit of an actual test instead of running a vulnerability scan or just doing regular code reviews? Not saying that you can't find any bugs, but we're talking about a whole attack surface area that you should be targeting. So that's an interesting thing to see how things are different and how they evolved from actually doing testing, even though there were still people using tools, to not really actually doing penetration testing and more of an assessment.
Yeah, that slow and steady, well, actually, I guess it's rather rapid switch. Well, and a lot of that switch, I would argue, is because, and almost solely because, the lack of qualified personnel. It's much easier to hire someone who can just run a tool and do an assessment than it is to hire people who can do real, no kidding, penetration tests, real no kidding engagements, period. And that's even more true in the application security world, where, I mean, you really want to talk about a dearth of professionals. It's in the application security world. Booz Allen, when I was there, had approximately 20,000 people, and I was the only one who did application security. Out of 20,000, and they're the premier and were the premier organization for cybersecurity for the federal government. And today, of course, they own 90% of all federal cybersecurity work. And they don't and can't really do true application security because they don't have the personnel for it.
Just to piggyback off of that, so everybody understand what a true AppSec program looks like, or AppSec security from either side, whether it's just strategic or tactical. Can you explain what a true application security program should be like? And since there is a shortage, so people who are trying to get into AppSec and want to understand how to be good at AppSec, what it really takes.
Oh, that's
I know,
complicated.
I know it's broad, but in a short sense, since you were talking about the shortage of penetration testers or consultants, period. But I mean, there's a reason why there's a shortage, right? And
There is.
not really understanding, especially from an AppSec perspective. There's what is it? Maybe 1% out of millions of people that may really be good at it. So there's always this question I get aligned, or that somebody's asking me is, what is AppSec and how do you become good at AppSec? And what does it take?
Yeah, yeah. So application security is, of course, security for applications. And everything, of course, is an application. So one of the big things you have to know or understand in order to do application security is you have to really truly understand the way everything works. And that, I think, is one of the biggest stumbling blocks for a lot of people. So you have to understand cryptography. You have to understand the operating system. You have to understand the kernel. You have to understand the way IO operates, the way network protocols operate, and you actually have to understand network protocols. You have to understand compilers. I mean, it's incredibly complicated, all-encompassing field. Because if you don't, then you won't understand the underlying reasons why vulnerabilities exist. So we went through and we did 2 demonstrations using insecure deserialization. Now, we purposely didn't show where you're doing remote code execution using bytecode. And there are a lot of reasons for that, as we explained in the description. A lot of it boiled down to almost exclusively, if you look at it, those are attacking the parser rather than attacking the actual application in question. Now, the reason why there's no point in showing an attack against a parser from our perspective is, from an application security perspective, we are attacking your application. Yes, we can attack the parser, but if I show a vulnerability against a parser, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And you're going to go through, you're going to say, well, this is out of my hands, and that's great, but what am I going to do? Go argue or scream at the provider or the parser, try switching to a different parser? That's actually not even a possibility in most cases, but more importantly, whoever has that parser at some point is going to patch that vulnerability. Whereas if we go through and are educating you about real insecure deserialization, which goes beyond that subset of attacking a parser, and show you real attacks where we are illustrating what true and complete insecure deserialization for a given application rather than just for a given parser can do, then what we're giving you is knowledge that you can then abstract, as we've discussed, and take and use elsewhere. You can take what we showed you and you can use it against any system that has serialization and deserialization components. And it doesn't matter if you're attacking the parser or if you're attacking the actual application itself. And that's, unfortunately, if you're going to really succeed in this industry, you have to be able to abstract data like mad. You have to. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Because you can't be an expert on minutia of everything, but what you can do is go through and bring everything up to a level where it's easy to understand, easy to recall, and then from there you can drill down into the specifics. And I think part of the reason why we have so many people who have issues is because the depth of knowledge that you have to have in order to be successful, and I mean truly successful. So you've seen, I go through, I have a conversation with developers and I point out to them, for example, that they have a series of synchronization issues, right? And the developers sat there and they were like, no, we don't have a problem. And you have to actually walk them through how their compiler works how their CPU works and how locking and unlocking, how the synchronization mechanisms work. Because a lot of people just assume that if they use lock or synchronized or synchronize, or, you know, they're throwing a mutex or a semaphore on it, that, you know, they're good to go. Or they're going through and they're using a concurrent or atomic structure, that suddenly magically they're okay. But as you've seen, that's not the case. And like I pointed out to a lot of these different developers, when you actually look at the documentation for the given languages, you have to understand where they have that leeway and where they don't, where they sit there and, from a synchronization perspective, lock and block anyone from manipulating a certain data structure and from being kicked off, preempted, and something else thrown on in the meantime, things of that nature. And it's complicated. There's absolutely positively no doubt about it. It's complicated. And you know, when you're doing an assessment, do you hit everything?
No.
No, you can't.
No, you're not going to be able to. It's, especially in the time that you allotted. So I mean,
oh yeah,
you know, only a week. You're not going to hit everything. But it is even interesting that you said something about locking. You know, remember having that conversation at the prior company about double check locking. That was even a thing, and you know, people just was flabbergasted. That's what this is an issue, which, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, which even though, you know, they not knowing that, but even if you kind of look at the whole picture of it, I mean, what issues that it can create, especially like race conditions and different things like that. And we, even when you're going from a compilation type, you know, issues that it could occur. So, I mean, certain things like that with AppSec, there's so much stuff to it and so many different areas, so many things to know that it's harder to just say, hey, let's just run this tool. We're gonna hit everything. You know, we're gonna find everything you can think of. It's a lot of moving parts to being an AppSec professional.
Right.
So, and as you can see, companies are starting to go towards being a full application security ecosystem. That is running every company nowadays. If you're not in AppSec, then you're kind of losing out, because that is the driver of every security company. Well, and if not, it will be in the future. So
it will be. You're exactly right. And it's funny because here's one of the big things about security. So security is a lot like quality assurance. And there are extreme similarities in methodology, in tooling, and so on and so forth, right?
Yep.
The truth is, good security staff are good developers and good administrators and good engineers, because they have to be. How can I help you fix something if I don't know how it works?
Right.
I mean, what am I going to give you? I'm going to give you the most generic, useless mitigation strategy, and you're going to look at this and go, none of this applies. I can't use any of this. If you understood anything about this technology and my architecture, you would know never, ever to make a suggestion like this. And that makes security look bad. It also makes us look useless. But a good security person, they look at it and they go, okay, well, here's what I would do. And then what happens? The people say, no, that won't work. Well, what do? Do you just stand there and insist and demand you will do it my way?
You got to have different solutions.
You do.
Multiple different solutions. Mm-hmm. That comes with understanding, you know, what you're attacking. But that goes to another thing that we talked about in probably prior episodes about, you know, different, okay, for instance, network penetration testers. Mm-hmm. Remember, we had this talk. Nothing against it. But when they start talking about buffer overflows, heap overflows, and all these different things, how my thing is, I don't understand how you're attacking something you don't understand. And to me, you would think they would be pretty good at AppSec, because these are applications that you're attacking, and even network protocols are written. They may not be a full-blown application per se, but there's still some code written for the app. You know, that protocol. So in order to hack something, you have to understand how it was built. So that leads me back to my point. Everything is defined by software.
Yeah.
So you have to understand how that works in order to be able to hack it. I don't care how skilled you are in whether you're an admin or not. To me, if you don't understand how that works, the underlying code, then how can you break it?
Right. So if you're a network guy and you're attacking, for example, someone's network, what you're really attacking is just the underlying software upon which the network is running. The Cisco iOS, Cat OS, I know, it's been supplanted, June OS, so on and so forth. That's what you're really attacking. And all that is software. That's all that is. When you're attacking Microsoft Exchange server, for example, and you're the Chinese, you're really attacking software. That's it. And that's one of the issues is the networking folks, for the most part, actually get to blindly attack things. They don't have to understand the way any of it works. And that's why you'll see so much fuzzing. They fuzz the daylights out of everything.
So fuzzing, okay. All right. Let's talk about the fuzzing topic. This is very interesting. So a lot of the times when you see whether it's car hacking or it's network penetration testing and you're hacking an app, and that's the first thing you learn, especially when you go to some of these certifications, fuzz,
Right.
fuzz. And I always thought that, and this fuzzing topic was kind of weird because it's complicated to even set up a fuzzer for an application, say for C, like C. What is it, AFL? So it's complicated to set those things up. However, you're basically running off. You're setting up this fuzzer, running off after you get your seeds. You're setting it up, running it off. You don't really have to know what the hell you're looking for, how everything works. You just run this fuzzer, go off, get you a drink of coffee. It probably take you half a day. Then boom, something crashes.
Right.
Then you go and check and see if it's actually vulnerable. Then you start writing your exploit, blah, blah, blah. And to me, isn't that pretty much the same idea of just a fool with a tool?
Yeah, it is. That really is. That is still the fool with a tool. And unfortunately, what a lot of people don't understand is the extreme limitations of a fuzzer. And they are extreme, truly extreme, because it can't throw every possible input at something. It's impossible. There's too much time. The domain space, which is what it's called, is far too large. And time itself far too finite. And it's you do yourself much better to do a code analysis than you do fuzzing. Fuzzing, I think, for the most part, is like running Metasploit's Autopon. It's the same thing. You don't know what you're doing. You're just boom, and then you walk away and hope it comes back with results. That's fuzzing. And Autopon is really just a fuzzer. And it's as stupid a fuzzer. It's as dumb of a fuzzer. And it's funny because you'll have a lot of people in the networking world who will look down on people who use Metasploit's Autopon. But they have absolutely no problem, zero problem running fuzzers and walking away, or running Nessus and walking away and counting that as, a job well done. They're so excited and they did such a great job as they pat themselves on the back. Whereas ideally what they would have done instead was done some automated surveillance coupled with some manual surveillance and some manual testing based on that, and they would have produced significantly better results.
Which is funny because, like I said, remember another issue with network penetration testing, as we talked about, was, and that's what doesn't matter what it is, but they fuzz a lot.
Yeah.
Okay? And a lot of the tools, when you see a report, they actually show you that they're running Nessus, and then Nessus brings back these different vulnerabilities that they found. So you didn't do any of your own, OSINTs, as they would say, to find these vulnerabilities, but you miss things because the fuzzer can only fuzz for things that you actually programmed it to fuzz for.
Right.
Can't Like, and it's not an AI. It can't automatically learn and figure these things out and then come up with different stuff. So it's especially with AppSec, there's no possible way, even though we use burp and everybody's like, oh, you guys live by the burp code. I'm like, burp code, what the hell is that? So I like burp and all, but it's a tool to help me, solve a problem, or come up with a solution for a problem. So it's not like something I use like Nessus.
Right.
You use that to look at the requests because that's a tool we need to use. But how often do you use burp fuzzer when you actually don't know an application?
I've never used it, actually. I only use the proxying capabilities.
And the only time I use a fuzzer is unless I really think something. But I use my own list. I come up with my own list.
Right.
I have my own list and payload, and I will use that just to see if I can get it to give me a certain response because I'm testing something else. However, more or not, you've seen my repeater. You've seen my repeater logs,
Mm-hmm.
and I have hundreds of them because I am always. That's the way I go through fuzzing. I'm manually going through and looking at each request because there's finite detail that you will miss if you're not actually looking at them from a manual perspective.
Right.
You'll miss all of the golden tickets and golden things.
Right.
Being funny. But you'll miss all the golden stuff and juicy stuff because you're automating or using a fuzzer. And to me, you would use those things to get the low-hanging fruits, but not for the more complicated.
Well, and I think a good example of that would be if someone sat there and ran a tool like SQL Map against a website, and they ran it against every parameter. It's the same general thing, and then they take whatever SQL Map told them and said this is in fact the case. So SQL Map kicked back and said there were no SQL injection points. They would just assume that's accurate. And we've gone over instances where there are plenty of things that SQL Map cannot and will not detect. It just won't. And then there are other instances where it comes away with false positives. I've complained to you before. I had a system Booz Allen ran a penetration test against, and their only actual finding, which was not a finding, was regarding LDAP injection on a system that had no LDAP server. And what had happened was it has a search engine on it, and it uses Solr. They queried it using, LDAP commands, which actually they just did %. That's not even querying it. It came back with all of this data, and they said, there we go, LDAP injection. That's a fool with the tool. They didn't do any analysis. They didn't look at it and say, we queried for the %, and it gave us a bunch of results that contained the % in it. They just said, it worked. We're done. Walk away. That's the state of our industry.
It's kind of like they went from just giving you a vulnerability scan partially to giving you a vulnerability scan with a little bit of testing for false positive, maybe just a little bit, but they didn't take it the extra mile.
Yeah. Well,
so
I was just going to say that's similar. You remember we got the scan results from this one organization where they claimed it was a penetration test, and we looked at it. It was just a raw scan report from Barricode or something like that. Like, this is not a penetration test. You used a scanner that doesn't count as a penetration anything. That's not even really an assessment. But that's what passes within our industry.
And it won't fly with AppSec.
No, it won't. And one of the big jokes is, as I'm sure you recall, it was fraught with false positives, and it had even more false negatives. And this is something we talked about before, where I mentioned that DoD was at the time looking for a tool that they could leverage because there is such a shortage and was such a shortage. And this was before even the 2010s. And so they were trying out Fortify and some other tools. We ran comparisons, and I found more in less time and had fewer. I had no false positives, but had no false negatives either in the code set that I had looked at. And at the end of the day, they spent so much time trying to sort through and filter through all the false negatives that it why even run a test at all? Why even run a scan at all? Because you're spending more time trying to deal with the results. And you see that today with check marks. You see that today with all of the tools that are out there. They just don't cut mustard. And that I think is one of the biggest reasons why at the end of the day right now, IT folks are commanding massive salaries. I mean massive. You've got people who are system administrators, Windows system administrators, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, many hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the truth is, I could take someone from high school and teach them probably within a year to be a pretty decent Windows system administrator. Okay, that's maybe a minor exaggeration, but only very minor. Booz Allen does it all the time, and it's a very successful model. Windows system administration is not a very hard task. Your security staff are asking for many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and these are unqualified. We're not even talking about people who are, particularly good in the industry, and there's just such a shortage. But the problem is that that's a temporary cover, and we see the same thing. So the DoD went through and for years has been trying to get their contractors to shore up their security, because a lot of the penetrations that are occurring, a lot of the incursions that are occurring right now in the DoD are coming through two major sources: civilian government agencies, and then of course, DoD partners, but also through things like contractors. So I don't need to break into the, U.S. Missile Defense Agency. I just need to break into unicorn company here that happens to be a contractor on that. So the DoD went through and they pushed out these new standards, CMMC. And when they pushed those out, I sat there and said, those won't stand, such as they were. And I stand by that. And it's been proven, because now the Senate is demanding that the DoD revise it, heavily revise it. The reason being, small businesses simply can't afford it. Now, here's one of the big jokes about contracting is for years, it was just a few major companies making huge amounts of money. But the federal government started pushing hard, saying you, different agencies, have to award contracts to so many small businesses and disadvantaged businesses, woman-owned, hub-zone, veteran-owned, disabled veterans, so on and so forth, right? Those small organizations don't have what it takes to meet CMMC. Now, CMMC goes through and it's supposed to have your network and all your equipment as a contractor secured, and it gets audited and all this other stuff. But the issue there is, number one, the program is not properly in place. They don't have a good, solid on-ramp for auditors. So how you even get an auditor is still incredibly up in the air. How much auditors make you pay? And then who pays it? Well, the answer, of course, is the contract company, right? Well, if an audit costs you $100,000, can you, as a small business who's just trying to start up, afford that? No. Not even close. And the other thing about government contracting is it typically takes around 6 months before you see a penny of what you're owed. And, after the first 6 months, it starts, it's surprising, huh?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So now you're saying these small businesses have to float for both 6 months, but also they have to float $100,000 or more dollars to have their audit. Well, the DoD sat there and they're like, well, but they should have been charging us for this audit that they're having. Okay, yes, we could argue that they should build that into their pricing, but most companies aren't, because what it comes down to so oftentimes is lowest bidder. So if
Yeah.
I build that pricing in, then I cost more than you. You didn't build the pricing in because you're a bigger small business or a bigger company, period. So you just ate the cost. You're like, well, 100,000, that's nothing. But
Right.
but also, how does a small business afford people like you and I? They can't, right?
No.
And they can't afford good IT staff either. In fact, a lot of small businesses have no real IT staff, or they contract it out. So they're definitely not getting what they need to have. And the truth is, what the government needs to do is stop contracting with these small businesses. Let me rephrase that because people will misunderstand. What the government needs to do is stop having small businesses and contractors, period, have DoD data on contractor systems. If the DoD really wants to take its security seriously, make contractors use DoD systems. Then contractors don't need to have this audit because DoD data never enters the contractor system. Problem solved. And some people might say that sounds too easy, but it is that easy. The only thing the contractor would deal with is invoicing. And at that point, the contractor's just dealing with invoicing how many people are on it. All of the IT is the government's. It's owned by the government, it's managed by the government, it's operated by the government, and or its contract staff, so on and so forth. But since the government has complete control, the government is the one auditing, and all prices, therefore, all costs are incurred by the government. Problem solved, and all of this goes away. Then you don't need CMMC. Then you don't need this complex audit structure and all of this other craziness. And everyone's happy. The government saves a boatload of money and is more secure at the same time. It's that simple. But here's the problem with the big lie. The big lie was that contractors saved money. So to the government, bringing it back in-house is going to cost money. But it won't. Because you, the Roniel startup, is supposedly charging them, that's right, supposedly charging them for that audit. So they're paying for the audit either way. What did they save? Well, they saved in the IT staff to manage it. No, they didn't, because they still paid for it. They paid for it in overhead. They also paid for HR, and they paid for expensive presidents, CEOs, CFOs, all this other stuff. Not just for one small business, but for a whole bunch of small businesses. And if you've ever been in a small business, I'm going to tell you this. Almost all of them, the owners use the business like a cash register.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So, I mean, really, you'd save so much money.
But do you think, now just out of that context, going back to one of the things you were talking about, do you think that that's also a component on why there's a shortage in security at this moment, especially from contracting, uh, government sector?
The government definitely consumes a lot of people, and contracting means that they consume even more. So I guess the one benefit to this structure is a lot more people are employed than would have been employed otherwise, which is fine unless you're having a labor shortage. If you're having a labor shortage, artificially adjusting employment through all of these otherwise unnecessary positions that would be eliminated through consolidation, it's simply not necessary. We don't need to sit there and have these fluff jobs, because what is it going to do? And at the prices the government is paying, and it's not just the government, it's the commercial world. At the prices that the government and the commercial world happen to be paying, especially for people like us, they would save themselves a lot more money, because a 1.7 cost for an individual, which means it's 170% of your salary, is a lot more when they're paying your salary plus, so on and so forth, than it would be if they brought it all in house and now your salary is whatever it was before, but they don't have that overhead of the vice presidents that don't do anything for them anyway, and the presidents and all this other stuff, all this middle management and so on and so forth. Like I said, the structure is great if you're having an unemployment crisis where you've got a lot of people on unemployment. The structure is not great when you have a lot of people who are employed and very few people, if anyone, sitting on unemployment. The structure also breaks down when you have a shortage of professional staff, which is what we're really talking about here. And that's why prices are so high. That's why you have IT staff who are doing basic job functions commanding huge salaries, and that's not going to be fixed anytime soon. That's going to take a very long time to fix, if ever. And I honestly would tell you it's probably not going to get fixed within 50 years. The education system isn't set up for it. And that's anywhere along the rung. That's elementary school, middle school, high school, college, none of it. It's not set up for IT. It's not set up for security. And truthfully, most people don't want to go in IT, and they shouldn't. They don't have the mind for it. They don't have the temperament, and they would be bored, and it would be a waste of their life and their potential because they could do so much more somewhere else. Which goes back to something we've discussed before. You've got a lot of jobs, childcare, janitorial jobs, things of that nature, that don't make anywhere near as much as they should. They're hard jobs, and they're very necessary for our society, but they don't make anything. IT is necessary for society, and honestly, I think there's going to be a bubble, and I think it's going to burst in 2 years when companies start forcing everyone back in. And a lot of these people are going to find themselves getting huge reductions in how much they get paid. But we'll see.
Do you think that security will be that way, or will we just keep growing in the amount of money we make? Now, I think that I will say this, that it could be from an AppSec perspective, it's going to grow more than it would be for some of the people that are in other areas. But what are your thoughts on that?
I suspect companies have very short-term memory. The government has a longer, government has a longer-term memory. I suspect once all of this is over and companies start making everyone go back in again, or they stop getting compromised like mad, knowingly compromised like mad, you're going to see them rapidly return to reducing their security staff because they'll see us as a burden. And then they'll go back to contracting it out again because they think it's cheaper, even though it's not. And they justify that by saying, well, I only, my product only needs assessed once every quarter. Well, that's great, but you, PayPal, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Amazon, whatever, you don't have one product. You've got a lot of products, so you're getting assessed constantly. So you need your own internal staff. There's no reason to have contract staff except to have an independent audit or an independent assessment, which is important.
Yeah. I'm just kind of wondering because it's different if you're a consultant or a contractor, because most of the places are, their company is security as a service.
Right.
So, I don't think they're going to get rid of their team, but I'm wondering if they would reduce the pay because some of them feel that the security people are getting too much money.
Yeah.
But if you ask me, I don't think it's enough.
No, it's not.
Because of the shortage, especially in application security, it's for myself, just speaking for myself, I do everything. Right. And then there's multiple projects that I have to do because not everybody can specialize on everything. Not everybody specializes in, big clients and IoT, application security stuff and just as a whole and everything. There may be some people that are good at web apps. We're not going to go there, but web apps. But then you think about the whole spectrum. It's not just about testing a web app. It's about everything: code reviews, web apps, mobile apps, all of that, everything. And when you start getting to real applications, some of their flaws and some of the issues that you find there. But I think for application security professional that they should get paid a lot more than they do, because we have to do a lot more. And not only that, you also have to be good at other things as well, whether it's cloud, network stuff. You have to have a little bit of all of that to mix in and sprinkle with AppSec. It's not just, hey, we're just looking at apps and web apps all day. No, it's a whole ecosystem of different stuff. And it's going to grow as there's more technology and applications being invented. So
I agree, but I think an important part, if our industry is really to start getting paid what it's worth, it needs to clean house and get rid of a lot of the pretenders. There are far too many people who are just filling seats, who don't know what they're doing. They're really bad at it. They don't belong, and they never will, because they don't have the temperament, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the understanding, and they don't have the desire and passion that it takes. This is an industry that requires an incredibly large amount of knowledge and understanding about a lot of things, and expertise in a lot of things. And you're exactly right. I would argue in general we do get grossly underpaid, because the gap between an application security professional and your standard security professional is about $30,000. Okay. And that's at the entry level. So it's the difference between a $19,000 job and a $60,000 job. And really that gap should be significantly more, because your entry level application security professional has to know a lot more, and they have to have a lot more experience. They may be entry into that field, but that doesn't make them entry, period. And that's something a lot of people forget. And that gap just grows further and further as that person gets more experience. You have to understand a lot more than you would in any other field. And again, I say this as someone who's done network administration, system administration, network architecture, and engineering on grand scale for the DoD across many thousands of systems that are, I don't even want to get into the complexities there. I've done application development. I've done all of this stuff, forensics, incident response, so on and so forth. And I am telling you, far and away, application security requires all of that knowledge and more, at least to be successful. And so really, I mean, I got told once, well, yeah, but when you came here, you probably don't have the same duties. And I'm like, but I still have to have that knowledge. So, I mean...
And experience. It's just different.
Yeah. Definitely.
Like, you carry all of that experience from where you came from in all those years of different areas to a job that is nowhere near the experience you gained from being in the DoD or the government. You carry all of that knowledge over, and it's more, as you've seen, more than where we were at and people actually knew about.
Right.
You know, they didn't have that knowledge. So you're bringing that knowledge over that it's just, it's priceless.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and they used it. They actively used it.
They used it. They misused it. They did everything over there wrong. And then wanted to change. Say they wanted to tell you that you didn't know what you were talking about, that this is not right, but then turn around and use what they said was not right.
Right. Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
That's usually because they don't understand it.
Right. That's exactly right. And that just goes back to the amount of information you have to have within this. So to be able to have that discussion with the network administrators, with the system administrators, how to secure this application, and then with the development team, how to secure this application, and why a vulnerability exists and what it is and the complexities involved. Because a lot of the times we're discussing concepts that the development staff, the network staff, the sysadmin, they don't understand, they don't know about. And part of it is because they are treated like they're siloed. And I don't care about this whole DevOps and all this other stuff. They're still siloed. The expertise is still siloed. And to bring it all together, which is what your application security folks are supposed to do, especially once you start talking cryptography and all that good stuff and cryptology, I mean, that's complicated stuff you're now discussing. And to bring that all into a single package and to be able to speak authoritatively to it, it's amazing the response you get from developers and from, I should say, from the other side. Everyone on that other side, when they listen to it and they know it's someone that's actually speaking with knowledge and authority on the topic, the fight just isn't there. They don't fight you on your findings, and they won't fight you on even your mitigations. What instead they'll do, as you've heard, is they'll sit there and they'll tell you, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. And it's like, okay, well, I understand. Given your architecture, that makes a lot of sense. Let's adjust. Let's work together, which is what you have to do to build a solution that works for your system. That's real security. That's good security. But that requires you to understand the technology, all of the technology in question. Because I can't mitigate and give you a good path forward if I don't understand your environment, if I don't understand your use cases, if I don't understand how JWT works in a stateless environment with ASP.NET, and you've got these web application firewalls sitting out here. If I don't get all of that and understand the way that content, so on and so forth, operate, then, how can I give you a good solution for your specific situation, your specific system? I can't. That's good application security.
Yeah, I agree. I think people misalign that, you need, like, security is not just going in and, oh yeah, I'm going to pop shells and I'm going to,
that's the easy part.
The buffer and other stuff. So, that's the easy and fun part, but the thing that people miss is we're here to solve a problem for a client and give them a solution. And maybe there's not every solution is going to work for them, but you have to have multiple solutions. But you got to understand how everything is built and how it works. Like you said. So people miss that. They come on and, I'm going to go and pop shit. I'm like, no, it's more than that. It's more to that. And then maybe the boring, we have to write reports and we have to talk to the client. But I think it's it's a joy when you really help a client solve a problem.
Yeah.
That they didn't even know about. And, if they didn't know about it and we wasn't to help them, they could be the next face on, the newspaper. So it feels really good to be able to help people. And that's what we're here for. We're here to, help people.
Yeah.
We are the superheroes, if you really want to be honest. Like, I've always wanted to be, the Batman or the Iron Man or that person. But when you really think about it from a reality perspective, we are the superheroes when it comes to protecting companies and clients or customers or people outside that don't understand technology. We are the heroes. We are pushing the envelope.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that is an important thing to keep in mind. And that goes back to what I said about the proper temperament, because it's not about popping shells. That's honestly easy. There's very little difficulty in that. It's about helping to solve problems, find and solve problems before they become a real problem, and to do so in a way that works for them and is economical and feasible. That's the trick. That's the hard part. That's the art to our job. So,
yeah, and it is an art. It's an art form.
It is. And it's beautiful. Beautiful when you see it done right. Absolutely stunning.
And if you haven't seen it done, go check out our last episode where we actually demonstrate some deserialization authentication bypasses. So you can see how beautiful it is once you understand the underlying code and how to find these things. So it becomes a really, really beautiful, and becomes an art form, and basically a self-expression of oneself. So, I mean, just like martial art. So yeah, it all comes back around. But however, this is our segment for today. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And I am Roniel.
I am DaRon.
And thank you for watching this episode of the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. We'll see you on the next episode.
Have fun.